I'm sorry about the 7 years, but I'm glad we did it, because now I can mourn a loss instead of being angry. Does that make sense?
The fear didn't arrive all at once. It crept in quietly, settling into the family like a shadow that grew longer with every passing day. The kind of fear that doesn't scream but suffocates slowly, wrapping itself around conversations, glances, and unspoken thoughts. They didn't want to move, not really. But if they were going to be forced into another upheaval, Vegas felt like the safest lie they could tell themselves. A place where tolerance might soften the blow and anonymity could hide the fractures already forming beneath the surface. Still, the children felt it immediately. Garrison sat there heavy with worry, the weight pressing down on him in a way he couldn't fully explain, and the adults tried to soothe him with gentle words that barely masked their own panic. The secret itself became a burden, one so cruel it demanded silence from children who were already losing everything. Parents told their kids their worlds were about to be ripped apart and then asked them not to tell their friends, not to cry too loudly, not to seek comfort where comfort lived. It broke something fundamental. You could hear it in the pauses, see it in the way voices cracked, feel it in the way no one quite knew how to move forward without betraying someone else's pain. The younger kids melted down in tears, and just as the emotional wreckage settled, the older kids had to be pulled back into the storm and forced to relive it all over again, only this time with logic and resistance layered over heartbreak. Mariah's situation made everything worse. She wasn't just losing a house or a neighborhood. She was losing a community that had anchored her spiritually, emotionally, socially. Public school had already been a battlefield once, and the private church school had become her refuge, her identity, her safe place. Moving to Las Vegas meant stripping all of that away in one sweep. And when the question finally surfaced, what about Mariah? It landed like a grenade in the middle of the room. The adults debated her future as if it were theoretical, while Mariah sat there knowing she was about to lose everything that made her feel whole. She didn't want adventure. She wanted stability. She wanted church. She wanted friends who spoke the same emotional language she did. When she asked to finish the school year, she didn't ask as a child begging for permission. She asked as someone fighting to hold onto the last solid ground beneath her feet. She came armed with a list, each reason painfully human. The dance she had committed to, the friend she couldn't abandon, the faith that shaped her sense of self. Every reason made sense. Every reason was valid. And still it didn't matter. Because hovering over all of it was a mantra that crushed individuality in the name of unity. Where we go one, we go all. Choice was an illusion, reserved for adulthood, postponed until damage had already been done. Family, in this version of reality, wasn't protection. It was obligation. Behind the scenes, resentment had been fermenting for years. The move wasn't new. The idea had been floated, dismissed, ridiculed, resurrected again and again until it became a personal obsession. Every time it came up, it was met with eye rolls, disbelief, and frustration from the wives who had finally built a life that felt stable. Homes were comfortable. Kids were thriving. Businesses were growing. And yet the insistence remained. Convincing one wife was impossible. Convincing all of them felt like war. So the strategy shifted. If emotion wouldn't work, logic would. If discussion failed, presentation would succeed. Poster boards appeared. A tone so serious it felt almost corporate. The living room transformed into a boardroom, and the wives arrived knowing something big, and probably disastrous, was about to be sold to them. The tension was immediate. Nervous pacing, forced jokes, sweat breaking through bravado. This wasn't just a family discussion. It was a last stand. The pitch began with trauma, reaching back to Utah, to the fear of prosecution, to the night they fled like criminals despite believing they had done nothing wrong. They hadn't left because they wanted to. They left because they were hunted, threatened, backed into a corner by laws that labeled their family illegal. Vegas was supposed to be temporary, a shelter, never a forever home. That was the story being retold now, reshaped into justification. Yes, the hearts broke back then. Yes, the pain was unbearable. But eventually, something magical happened. They rebuilt. They thrived. And that, paradoxically, became the problem. Comfort was never part of the long-term plan. The wives listened, some nodding, some visibly unraveling as memories resurfaced. Memories of fear, anger, and being forced to uproot their children overnight. Vegas had been mocked as a party town, a place never meant to raise families, yet it became the very place where safety returned, where children grew roots, where happiness quietly took hold. Now those roots were being yanked out again. Not because of danger, not because of necessity, but because the dream had shifted once more. The argument was clear even if it wasn't spoken. We did this once for survival. Why are we doing it now? And as the clock ticked down to moving day, denial took different forms. Some packed obsessively, every spare minute consumed by boxes and tape. Others couldn't bring themselves to start at all, paralyzed by the finality of it. Truly, who had known no other home, carried the sadness openly, voicing what everyone else tried to swallow, that leaving meant losing friends, memories, favorite places, pieces of herself she could never get back. Her pain reopened old wounds, memories of another child years ago forced to abandon toys because there wasn't time, because there wasn't room, because survival demanded sacrifice from the smallest shoulders. This time, there was an attempt to be gentler, to spare her that trauma. But even kindness couldn't erase the truth. Another childhood was being disrupted in the name of adult decisions. And beneath all of it, something darker was forming. An unspoken realization that the moves, the rules, the mantras about unity were no longer holding the family together. They were pulling it apart, thread by thread, emotion by emotion, until what remained was fear, exhaustion, and a growing question no one was ready to ask out loud yet. What happens when staying together hurts more than letting go? As the days closed in and the move became unavoidable, the tension didn't ease. It sharpened, turning every interaction into a potential breaking point, every conversation into another reminder that the family was no longer moving as one unit but being dragged forward by momentum they no longer controlled. Packing boxes stacked higher while patience ran thinner, and the emotional labor of holding everyone together began to expose just how fractured the foundation already was. Some wives pushed through exhaustion, packing relentlessly as if speed could outrun grief, while others stayed frozen in denial, choosing distraction over acceptance, convinced that if they didn't touch the boxes, the reality might hesitate too. Kody moved from house to house, checking in like a manager overseeing a project rather than a husband anchoring a family. And the contrast didn't go unnoticed. Children watched closely, sensing the imbalance even when adults pretended it wasn't there. Truly, sadness deepened, her resistance no longer quiet or polite but openly painful, as she admitted she didn't want to leave anything. Her friends, her school, her memories behind. Her words echoed what many felt but were too afraid to admit, that this move wasn't an adventure, it was a loss, and losses don't feel exciting no matter how often adults try to rebrand them. Meanwhile, cracks in the marriages widened under the pressure of COVID restrictions and long-standing resentments that finally had nowhere left to hide. Christine voiced what she had been carrying for years, that Kody was absent, emotionally checked out, physically present only when it suited him, and that his energy at Robin's house felt entirely different from the disengagement she experienced daily. Kody bristled at the accusation, defending himself by pointing to sacrifices he believed no one acknowledged, insisting he stayed home, gave up travel, paused his work, and followed the rules. But from Christine's perspective, presence wasn't about location. It was about connection, and that connection had been missing long before the pandemic gave anyone an excuse. Her children noticed it too, quietly confiding that watching their parents' relationship crumble while seeing him fully engaged elsewhere was its own kind of heartbreak. These weren't new complaints. They were simply no longer buried. Kody, in response, doubled down on justification. He framed his absence as responsibility, his detachment as practicality, admitting without apology that paying someone to help with children made more sense than losing money from business obligations. He described himself as scattered but fair, claiming the wives were miscounting his time because they were already struggling. The problem, he implied, wasn't neglect, it was perception. But perception becomes reality when it's shared by too many people for too long. Christine felt the difference in her bones, and no explanation could rewrite the lived experience of feeling unwanted in your own marriage. What made it worse was realizing this wasn't temporary. This was who he was choosing to be. As illness spread through parts of the family, temporary reunions offered brief moments of relief, but they didn't heal the deeper wounds. The distance wasn't just physical anymore, it was emotional, structural, irreversible. And while Kody spoke of fairness and balance, Christine reached a conclusion that felt both terrifying and liberating. She could no longer stay. The marriage, after nearly 3 decades, was over. Not because of one argument or one move, but because of years of accumulated absence, dismissal, and emotional starvation. Her decision wasn't impulsive. It was the final step in a process that had been unfolding quietly for a long time. When Christine began preparing to move to Utah with Truly, the weight of that choice settled over the family like a fog. The goodbye wasn't dramatic in the way people expect. It was awkward, stiff, heavy with things left unsaid. Polite words replaced real conversation. Smiles were forced. Hugs felt transactional. Kody admitted he didn't know how to exist around her anymore, choosing distance as his coping mechanism, resigned to the idea that she would simply disappear from his life except for moments involving their child. Christine, meanwhile, carried the burden of knowing she was leaving broken hearts behind, even as she believed, deep down, that she was moving toward something better. She watched Truly struggle with the transition, anxious and overwhelmed, and reminded herself that children don't always understand healing while it's happening. Public reaction poured gasoline on the fire. As news of Christine's departure spread, judgment followed swiftly, aimed in every direction. Fans praised her strength and independence while tearing Kody apart, and the criticism didn't just hurt. It exhausted those still standing in the wreckage. Comparisons became unavoidable. Questions grew louder. Why stay? Why endure? Why not follow her lead? And while Christine insisted her worth existed independently of Kody, her departure fundamentally altered the power balance within the family. The idea that plural marriage was unbreakable had been shattered, and no one could pretend otherwise anymore. Through it all, one bond quietly transformed instead of collapsing. Janelle stood by Christine, not as a sister-wife bound by structure, but as a friend bound by shared history, shared children, and shared survival. She didn't just support Christine's choice. She helped her imagine what came next. New beginnings replaced old rules. The language shifted. The future, once rigidly defined, became fluid. For the first time, there was no script to follow, no expectation to maintain appearances, just uncertainty and the fragile freedom that comes with it. And while Christine packed her life into boxes and prepared to cross state lines, the rest of the family stood still, stunned by the realization that the dream they had defended for so long was already dying. They just hadn't been brave enough to name it yet. The silence that followed Christine's departure was louder than any argument they had ever had, settling into the spaces she left behind and forcing everyone else to finally sit with what had been broken for years. For Kody, the grief arrived late and without warning, crashing through his anger like a wave he could no longer outrun. For so long, fury had been easier than sorrow. Anger gave him something to fight against, something to blame. But now, with Christine gone for good, there was nothing left to battle except the truth. He spoke of it as the end of an era, his voice heavy with disbelief, as if the loss had only just become real, as if decades of warning signs hadn't been flashing all along. He mourned not just the marriage but the dream itself, the idea that they had built something extraordinary, something special, something worth the sacrifice. And yet, beneath the grief, there was confusion, because he couldn't understand why it hurt this much when he had already made it clear he didn't want her in his life anymore. Christine watched this emotional unraveling from a distance, stunned by its timing. She had endured years of neglect, dismissal, and rejection, only to be met with tears and nostalgia once she finally walked away. The sudden vulnerability felt disorienting, even unsettling. When he spoke of walking her down the aisle someday, joking or not, it landed wrong. Too familiar, too intimate, too late. She didn't know whether to laugh, recoil, or question his motives. The boundary she had fought so hard to establish was suddenly being tested by emotions she never asked for. To her, the marriage had ended long before the paperwork or the move. What she was doing now was simply catching up to a reality she had already accepted. As Kody's anger dissolved into sadness, He admitted something that had been buried beneath years of defensiveness, that he had been stuck in the rage phase of divorce, unable to grieve because fury had consumed all the oxygen in the room. Only now, with Christine fully gone and Janelle emotionally distant, did the loss finally sink in. The family he once commanded no longer revolved around him, and the authority he relied on had no power in a space shaped by independence. The plural marriage that once defined his identity was unraveling in ways he could no longer control, and that loss of control was perhaps the most painful part of all. Christine, meanwhile, was doing something radical. She was moving forward. Not recklessly, not blindly, but with cautious curiosity. She spoke openly about dating, about meeting new people, about being open to love again without desperation or fear. She wasn't searching for a replacement. She was rediscovering herself. The bed and breakfast she once built out of necessity no longer felt like her dream, just another chapter that had served its purpose. She talked about new possibilities, about reshaping her life around joy instead of endurance, about choosing partnership rather than obligation. For the first time in years, her future felt unwritten, and that felt exhilarating. Janelle, standing beside her, experienced her own reckoning. With Christine gone, the illusion that the family could simply adapt shattered. The optimism she once clung to evaporated, replaced by the realization that the original vision, the cooperative, loving plural family, was no longer attainable. She admitted she couldn't see a hopeful path forward anymore, and in that admission was a quiet grief that mirrored Christine's, though it took a different shape. Together, they redefined what sister wives meant, stripping it of marital competition and leaving behind genuine friendship. Their bond survived because it was rooted in respect rather than hierarchy. Not everyone shared that closeness. Relationships with Robin and Mary remained strained, tangled in years of unmet expectations, misunderstandings, and emotional distance. There was grief there too, not just for what was lost but for what never truly existed. Christine acknowledged that while history connected them all, connection alone wasn't enough to sustain trust. Some bonds had simply eroded beyond repair, and no amount of nostalgia could rebuild them without honesty and accountability that hadn't yet arrived. As the family adjusted to this new reality, lighter moments surfaced, almost jarringly so. Awkward humor, playful banter, small gatherings filled with laughter that felt unfamiliar after so much heaviness. These moments didn't erase the pain, but they revealed something important. Life was continuing, whether anyone was ready or not. Dating stories were shared. Jokes were made. New experiences unfolded, even as the old world crumbled in the background. It was messy, imperfect, and deeply human. And yet, beneath the humor, uncertainty lingered. No one knew what came next. There were no guidelines, no examples to follow, no blueprint for what a family looks like after its central promise collapses. The rules that once governed everything, who belonged where, who mattered when, who came first, had dissolved. What remained was choice. And choice, for people who had lived by rigid structure for decades, was both liberating and terrifying. The realization settled slowly but unmistakably. This wasn't just one wife leaving. This was the quiet collapse of an entire way of life. And even as some embraced the freedom ahead, others were only beginning to understand what they had lost. What remained after the dust settled wasn't clarity. It was space, wide and unfamiliar, stretching out in front of people who had spent their entire adult lives following a script written long before they truly understood the cost. The family that once moved as a single unit now existed as fragments, each piece drifting at its own pace, learning in real time what it meant to live without the structure that had defined them. For Kody, the loss finally became undeniable. The anger that once fueled him had burned itself out, leaving behind grief so heavy it surfaced in sobs and stunned silence. He spoke of mourning, not just Christine, but the dream itself, admitting that the polygamist vision he had defended for decades now felt like a coffin being lowered into the ground. He realized too late that flexibility had slowly turned into neglect, that in trying to hold everything together loosely, he had allowed the most important bonds to slip through his fingers. The era was over, and there was no speech, no rule, no demand for unity that could resurrect it. Christine, listening to this delayed awakening, felt a complicated mix of empathy and detachment. She understood grief, she had lived in it for years, but she also knew she couldn't step back into a pain she had already survived. The sadness no longer belonged to her. She had crossed into a new chapter where endings, while still heavy, no longer defined her entire identity. She spoke openly about embracing uncertainty, about allowing life to unfold without rigid expectations, about trusting that joy could exist without permission. Dating wasn't about desperation. It was about curiosity. The future wasn't about replacement. It was about possibility. For the first time, she wasn't surviving, she was choosing. Janelle mirrored that evolution in her own way, standing firm in her independence while holding on to the relationships that felt real and reciprocal. She rejected the idea that her value was tied to her marriage status, pushing back against public pressure that demanded she follow Christine's path or justify staying. Her friendship with Christine deepened, no longer weighed down by comparison or competition, just two women bound by shared history and mutual respect. The word sister-wife transformed, shedding its original meaning and becoming something broader. Chosen family, enduring loyalty, partnership without possession. Elsewhere, unresolved tension lingered. Trust with Robin and Mary remained fragile, shaped by years of quiet resentment, misunderstandings, and emotional distance that couldn't be erased by time alone. There was grief there too, not loud or dramatic, but persistent, rooted in the realization that some relationships had been more performative than authentic. Christine acknowledged that reconciliation wasn't impossible, but it would require honesty, accountability, and difficult conversations that no one seemed ready to have yet. History alone wasn't enough to rebuild closeness. Life, however, refused to pause for reflection. New homes were bought. Properties were purchased sight unseen. Dreams shifted shape. Friends gathered for laughter-filled nights that contrasted sharply with the heaviness of the past. Painting, joking, flirting, reminding one another that pleasure and humor still had a place in their lives. Dating stories emerged, awkward and hopeful, filled with curiosity rather than fear. For women who had spent decades prioritizing family survival over personal desire, even small acts of independence felt revolutionary. Kody, meanwhile, struggled to redefine himself in a world where control no longer equaled connection. In moments of misplaced humor and awkward flirtation, his discomfort with monogamy surfaced, revealing how deeply ingrained the old dynamics still were. He spoke of missing affection, of feeling like a partner rather than a commander, of realizing too late that love couldn't be managed like a schedule. The shift unsettled him, exposing vulnerabilities he had never fully confronted. The family culture of emotional restraint, once necessary for survival, now felt like a barrier to intimacy he didn't know how to dismantle. As the final goodbyes were said and moving trucks disappeared down long roads, the weight of generational impact became impossible to ignore. Children watched adults redefine love, commitment, and independence in real time, absorbing lessons that would shape their own futures. The collateral damage was real, and it would last, but so would the resilience. What once felt like an explosion slowly revealed itself as a transformation, painful but necessary. In the end, there was no clean resolution, no triumphant conclusion, just acceptance. Acceptance that the family they were had served its purpose for a time, that something meaningful had existed even if it couldn't last. Acceptance that grief and gratitude could coexist. Acceptance that endings didn't erase the past, they recontextualized it. The era was over, the dream laid to rest, and in its place stood something uncertain but honest. And as they stepped forward one by one into lives no longer bound by the same rules, a final truth lingered in the air. Sometimes the bravest thing a family can do isn't staying together at all costs, but allowing each other the freedom to finally